Hi, you've clicked on to today's tropical tidbit for Friday, August 24th. Here in the Atlantic, we have Joyce, or what's left of her over here. She's getting sheared big time to the northwest. The low-level center is way back here in the southern part of the convection. It's interacting with a big upper-level low. You can kind of see the rotation here, and this will not be strengthening a whole lot over the next few days. Again, coming northwest, possibly something for Bermuda to watch, but not an imminent threat, and we can safely ignore this system for the most part right now. This is Tropical Storm Isaac, our big issue, of course, in the central Caribbean. And here we are. I don't know why this last frame is black. I'll blotch it out here. Yesterday, Isaac looked like it was going to get its act together a little bit better, but it did struggle. It was still decoupled. Yesterday, the mid-level center was down to the south. The surface center was up more towards the eastern tip of the Dominican Republic and Puerto Rico. And since then, it looks like last night it has finally stacked. The main pressure falls were to the south. So the system has basically reformed a little bit to the south, and the system is now stacked in here. And it looks like it's going to start getting a better defined circulation today. The recon did go in, found a pressure fall to 1,000 millibars, winds up to 60 miles per hour. And so it is looking like it's overcoming this pattern and starting to strengthen a bit. We need it to wrap convection all the way around now and start developing a core and see if it can make a run at hurricane status before getting sucked up into the greater Antilles. You can see the nice spiked outflow coming out of the southwest part of the storm, and this is one of my favorite things in meteorology is spiked outflow in tropical cyclones. It usually means that there's a lot of air rising and coming out the top of the storm, and usually indicates strengthening. Every time I've ever seen spiked outflow, the system that was generating it was deepening, so it's a great thing to look for to see if the system is intensifying. The system is still struggling a little bit, though. There's some dry air off to the west in the Caribbean that's getting entrained into the western and southern part of the circulation. You can see the western periphery of the moisture bubble is a little bit ragged, indicating that it's getting attacked by dry air, and so there's still a little bit for this to deal with, but overall the system looks like it is starting to overcome most of this. Here's the water vapor imagery. You can see that dry air off to the west in the western Caribbean. We have this sharp trough you can see now over the eastern Gulf of Mexico. This is the trough that's eroding the western periphery of the Bermuda High and is going to allow this to start curving poleward. As you can see right now, the motion of the storm, I know the frames are black, but the motion you can see is a little bit more towards the northwest now, and the average of the last 4 recon fixes before the last mission left was at 305 degrees, so this is definitely starting to make its turn, and it's going to be pretty interesting to see how it interacts with Hispaniola right now, because currently the short-term models have this going across the extreme western Haitian peninsula, but you can almost see this trying to get sucked up towards the mountains of Hispaniola, and this island has a habit of doing this to a lot of storms, sucking it up to the north and then throwing it out to the west-northwest afterwards because of frictional effects. And again, these mountains remain the greatest uncertainty in this forecast because of the jerky motions that can occur in the track, and we could get a short-term change at any time. This is significant for Hispaniola especially because there's a lot of rain bands off to the east here that are going to be arcing in, creating a lot of heavy rain on the upslope sides of their mountains for the next couple of days, and flooding is certainly a concern as always for Hispaniola with storms like this. You can see on the 500 millibar chart with the 12-hour change that we have a lot of blue colors directly north of the storm indicating height falls, which means the western part of this ridge is starting to weaken and give way to this trough and weakness over the southeast United States, which is going to allow this to curve poleward in the general direction of Florida during the next few days. And of course, we'll continue to look at the models, which continue to be rather dramatic in the changes that have occurred over the last few days. This is the European run from last night, again close to Mobile, Alabama, as it was in yesterday morning's video of mine. But the 12Z run yesterday after my video switched over to western Louisiana, which was surprising, and I thought that was too far west, but it has switched back now towards the east. Last night, G4 recon data got into the models, which should have made them a little bit more accurate, and the European switched back and is now a little bit closer to some of the other models, but it is still the western outlier. Now here's the 0Z models from last night, and a lot of these were still interpolated from 18Z and did not have the recon data in them. But the runs last night, notice what they had. They actually switched pretty close to the European here, showing a bullseye near Mobile or the Mississippi coastline, a straight northwest track into the US. And look, it even continues past the Mississippi River in here. And as soon as I saw this, of course the NHC shifted their track to Mobile after that because they follow the consensus very tightly. But whenever you see a track like this, you have to ask yourself if it makes any kind of sense. And to me, a northwest track like this in a straight line from the Central Caribbean south of Hispaniola up across the Mississippi River without recurving doesn't make a lot of sense, and there's a reason for that. If we look at all of the storms since 1851, for the last century and a half, that have passed near Isaac's position, the storms coming out of the Central Caribbean in August and September are generally one of two groups. They're either Caribbean cruisers that go deep into the western Gulf of Mexico, or they're a group that comes over Cuba and interacts with the Florida Peninsula. And you can see that although a couple of storms randomly came through the sea and curved up, I see no tracks that came up over Cuba and took a shortcut northwest towards the central Gulf Coast. It just has not happened. The closest track to what the models have been trying to show is a storm that came across Cuba in 1928 and moved north-northwest into Apalachicola, Florida, but it was curving north-northwest to north around the periphery of the ridge. Makes a lot more sense. I see no shortcut storms to the northwest into the central Gulf Coast. So the 0Z run didn't make a lot of sense to me. The reason that this track doesn't happen really is because if you have the ridge over the tropical Atlantic far enough south that the storm is already moving northwest such that it gets into Cuba, it has to round the periphery of the ridge, which usually takes it into Florida. Rarely do you ever see a ridge that's this far south and has a connection over the southeast that can allow a shortcut track like the one the models tried to show, and in the last 150 years it has not happened. And notice at 12Z, the big switch. Notice that the models now recurve this over Georgia and South Carolina after the recon data got in them. See the big flip here. That's a monstrous flip, days 5 to 7, from the Mississippi River to a much nicer looking recurve that I think is the beginning of what I still feel will be an eastward adjustment of the models, rounding off this turn just a little bit more in here and making this a more classic recurve near Florida, and you'll see my track later. And then here's the GFS day 4, 500 millibar. This is from the 6Z run. I have a map from the 12Z on later as it came out when I re-recorded this video. This is my second time at it. But this is the 6Z showing the general upper pattern. You can see Joyce out here trying to strengthen. Notice the ridge that she's rounding in the central Atlantic, and then the ridge over the Four Corners region extending into Louisiana, and then the break is in between here over the southeast United States, and the storm is generally coming northward across Florida here. And you can see the short wave coming across the Great Lakes that is enhancing this weakness further as the first trough lifted out. And this should generally come between these two ridges, and I like the track that the CMC ensembles try to depict with the cluster right near the southeastern part of Florida. They have a few out here in the central Gulf, but the ensemble mean low is near Miami. And the Japanese model is also just south of Miami in 4 days, showing the same general thing. And to look at the 12Z GFS, as I said, this is my second time recording this video, and I decided to check the 12Z before I re-recorded. And here it is, a little bit farther east, just southeast of Tampa here on the model, and it comes up on the west coast of Florida on this run, further east than the last 3 previous runs in a row. So this is interesting, and that we may be starting to get the adjustment that I've been talking about this whole time, and with these models trying to come a little bit closer to the Florida Peninsula. And if we're going to talk about the track a lot, we need to talk about the intensity as well, because this is obviously one of the bigger things. Is if it gets water time in the Gulf of Mexico or just east of Florida, it's going to have a lot of fuel to work with all the hot water there this year, and it could strengthen quite quickly. Notice that we have an upper trough here at 200 millibars in 24 hours. This is the trough that we'll be trying to recurve it. This is going to be lifting out though. Notice by day 3 that the trough lifts out, but it splits a piece away and leaves a piece back over the central Gulf of Mexico that is backing southwestward. And when you see something like this, it's a classic ventilation pattern that allows upper level ridging to expand in between the exiting trough and the piece that split away and moves westward. And this is the kind of thing that can allow great upper divergence aloft, allow pressures to fall, and to help the system strengthen. The ridging is a little bit displaced off to the east here, which means if the track is west of Florida, there could be some shear, but in general it's a good ventilation pattern that could allow strengthening quickly into a hurricane. So here's my track this morning. Due to the relocation south of the center, the forecast point was going to be here today, but since it relocated to the south, the track has also shifted, but shows the same general shape coming across the Greater Antilles and then moving up now the Florida Peninsula. It was just east of it yesterday, has been shifted a little bit to the west due to the relocation, and now comes up the peninsula. And it should be noted again that there's more uncertainty on the western side due to more models there, and the Greater Antilles Mountains, again, the greatest wild wild card in this track forecast are the Caribbean mountains because of the jerky motions that can occur with systems that move across them. If Cuba tries to hold on to this a little bit longer, it could slip west of Florida and get lots more water time over the eastern Gulf of Mexico and move into the Florida Panhandle, at which point it could easily strengthen into a hurricane. The only reason I don't have it becoming a hurricane now is because it comes into the Florida Peninsula directly off of Cuba and will not have that much water time, but either side of Florida could get it to strengthen a lot more. And as far as Hispaniola and Cuba, it's going to be a close call whether this tries to make a run at hurricane status. So far, the intensity forecast has worked out well up until this point. It's now up at 60 miles per hour. The fact that the forecast models take it only across the western tip of Haiti now means that if it does take that track, there's more water in here between Jamaica, eastern Cuba, and Haiti, which means it could try to make a run potentially at hurricane status before making landfall in Cuba. So that is something for them to watch carefully. If it gets drawn quickly into the Haitian mountains by frictional effects, then it will not have as much time to strengthen. And of course, rainfall will be the biggest issue for the people in this area. And again, most of its strengthening, if it gets over water in here, will occur during this portion of its life. So in general, a slight westward adjustment from yesterday. I still think the models will be adjusting a little bit farther east towards my track with time, but of course we're still 4 to 5 days out from when it gets up here towards northern Florida, potentially only 3 days away from landfall if it hits near the southern part of the state. So this is in general a Florida storm. They will get the bulk of this, and the eastern Gulf Coast off towards the west should still be watching this as well as Georgia and the Carolinas for heavy rain after landfall, or if it happens to slip up just east of the Florida coastline as well. Alright, that's it for today. Thanks for watching.